What part of you don't belong here is so hard for you to understand?
Ma'am, I'm not looking for any trouble. My wife and I aren't bothering anyone.
Not bothering anyone? You're bothering me just by being here.
Manuel kept his composure. He'd heard insults like this before.
Just wait and see. I'll call the police, and maybe this time they'll finally do something about people like you.
Ivory raised her phone with a smug smile. She'd done this 23 times and never faced a consequence. What she didn't know was that every threat she made was aimed at the man who commanded the very department she was trying to weaponize. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The truck fit perfectly in the driveway. Manuel Tucker stood back and looked at it. A big white moving truck parked in front of a brick colonial house with black shutters and an oak tree in the front yard. His house. Their house. He let that word sit in his chest for a moment. Theirs. Box-marked kitchen does not mean put it in the living room, baby, Gwen called from the porch, her voice cutting through the July heat like a bell. Manuel laughed. I didn't do that. The mover did it. You were supposed to be watching. He shook his head, smiling, and hoisted another box from the truck bed. 15 years. That's how long it took. 15 years of budgeting, of saying no to vacations and new cars, of eating lunch at his desk instead of restaurants. 15 years of Gwen clipping coupons on Sunday mornings at the kitchen table. And now, this. A real house on a real street with real neighbors who waved from their yards like people on a television commercial. An older black woman across the yard lifted her hand in greeting. A young couple 2 doors down nodded and smiled. A man washing his car gave Manuel a thumbs up when he struggled with an oversized box. The street was alive, warm, ordinary in the best possible way. Manuel breathed it in. Then he noticed her. She was standing on the sidewalk directly across the street. A white woman, somewhere in her early 40s, with her arms crossed tight across her chest and her phone already pressed to her ear. She wasn't watching the movers. She was watching Manuel. Her eyes tracked him the way a security camera tracks movement. Steady, deliberate, recording. Manuel kept moving boxes. He told himself it was nothing. People get curious about new neighbors. That's normal. But she didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just kept talking into that phone, her eyes never leaving his. 20 minutes later, a squad car rolled slowly down Sycamore Glen Drive and stopped in front of the house. 2 officers stepped out. The one in front was white, maybe mid-30s, with a careful, practiced expression that Manuel recognized immediately. Not hostile. Worse than hostile. Cautious. The kind of caution that had nothing to do with actual danger and everything to do with the color of the man he was approaching. Afternoon, the officer said. His name tag read Flint. We got a call about some suspicious activity in the area. You mind if I ask what's going on here? Manuel set down the box he was holding. He did it slowly, deliberately. He straightened up to his full height. What's going on, Manuel said, his voice even and low, is that I'm moving into my house. Flint's eyes moved to the truck, to the boxes, to the front door standing wide open with furniture visible inside. You got any ID? Proof of residence? Manuel looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached into his back pocket, pulled out his wallet, and produced his driver's license. He reached into his front pocket and pulled out a folded document, the deed to the property, which he had carried specifically because some part of him had known, had always known, that a day like this might come. Flint took both. He looked at them. He handed them back without a word. Sorry to bother you, Flint said quietly. The apology sounded genuine and completely useless at the same time. He walked back to the squad car. His partner hadn't even gotten out. The car pulled away. Manuel stood on his own front lawn, in front of his own house, on the street where he planned to build the next chapter of his life. And he breathed through his nose once, twice, 3 times. Across the street, the woman with the phone was gone. Her front door was just clicking shut. Manuel picked up the box he had set down. He carried it up the porch steps. He walked through his front door. Gwen was in the hallway, completely still, her arms at her sides. She had seen all of it from the porch. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. Her jaw was tight, her eyes were sharp, and she was doing the same thing Manuel had just done, breathing slowly and deliberately, and refusing to let it break her. "You okay?" she asked anyway. Manuel set the box down in the hallway. "Yeah," he said. He didn't say anything else, but his eyes drifted back toward the front door, toward the street outside, toward the house across the way. The day had started with so much hope. It was still morning, and something had already been made very clear. The lemonade was cold and sweet, and completely out of place. That was the first thing Gwen thought when the older woman crossed the yard, carrying 2 glasses like it was any normal summer afternoon. Like a police car hadn't just pulled away from their driveway 10 minutes ago. Like the whole street hadn't just watched Manuel prove he had the right to stand in front of his own house. "I'm Lenora Baker," the woman said, holding out a glass to Gwen first, then Manuel. "I live right next door. Have for 19 years. She was 70, maybe, with silver-streaked hair pulled back neatly, and eyes that had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by it. She moved slowly but deliberately, the way people move when they've learned that patience is not weakness. It's survival. Manuel accepted the glass. "Manuel Tucker. This is my wife, Gwen." Lenora nodded. She looked at both of them carefully, the way a doctor looks at a patient before delivering a diagnosis they've already made. "I'm sorry about what happened," she said. "I wish I could tell you it was unusual." Gwen felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the lemonade. Lenora reached into the front pocket of her house dress and pulled out a small leather journal. It was dark brown and worn at the corners, the cover soft from years of handling. She held it with both hands, not like it was just a notebook, but like it was evidence, like it was something she had worked hard to protect. 7 years, Lenora said. That's how long Ivory Parvin has been calling the police on black folks on this street. She opened the journal to the first page. Her handwriting was small and precise, every line level. I started writing it down because I knew one day somebody would need to know. She began to read. August 14th, 7 years ago. The Washingtons at number 12 hosted a birthday cookout in their backyard. Ivory called and reported a loud, threatening gathering. 2 officers responded. The Washingtons were eating cake. October 3rd, 6 years ago. 16-year-old Jenny Merrill rode his bicycle down the street at dusk. Ivory called and described a suspicious individual casing the neighborhood. 1 officer responded. Jenny was delivering church flyers. February 9th, 5 years ago. Dr. Robin Ulmer, a retired professor who lived at number 7, was watering his front lawn on a Tuesday morning. Ivory called and reported a man behaving erratically near homes. 2 officers responded. Dr. Ulmer had a hose in his hand. Lenora kept reading. Entry after entry, date after date, name after name. Real people. Real moments. Each one interrupted by flashing lights and the particular humiliation of having to prove you belong somewhere you already live. Manuel stood very still through all of it. He didn't shift his weight. He didn't look away. He listened the way he had been trained to listen, completely, cataloging every detail, storing it somewhere organized and permanent inside his mind. 23 entries total, 23 times. Gwen realized partway through that she had stopped sipping her lemonade. She was just holding the glass, staring at the journal, feeling something build in her chest that was equal parts grief and fury. "Has anyone ever filed a complaint?" Manuel asked when Lenora closed the journal. "3 families tried," Lenora said. "Nothing came of it. Officers were polite, wrote things down. Nobody ever followed up." She paused. "One family moved away. The Washingtons. Said they just couldn't do it anymore." Across the street, a curtain moved. Ivory Parvan's front window. Just slightly. A pale hand pulling the fabric an inch to the side, enough to see through, not enough to be obvious about it. She was watching them. Standing in her own house, looking out at 3 black people standing on a lawn, having a conversation she couldn't hear and couldn't control, and she was watching. Manuel turned his head slowly and looked directly at the window. Not with anger. Not with any expression that she could take and twist into something threatening. He just looked. Steady, patient, unbothered. The curtain dropped back into place. Lenora tucked the journal back into her pocket and picked up her empty glass. "Welcome to Sycamore Glen," she said quietly. There was no bitterness in it, just the plain, tired truth of a woman who had been welcoming neighbors to this street for 19 years, and saying the same thing every single time. Manuel watched the window for one more moment. Then he turned back to the truck. There were still boxes to carry. The house was quiet by 9 o'clock. The movers were long gone. The boxes were stacked in every room, most of them still taped shut, waiting for a calmer day. Gwen had fallen asleep on the couch somewhere around 8:30, exhausted from the heat and the effort and the weight of everything that had happened before noon. Manuel had draped a blanket over her and turned off the living room lamp. Now he sat alone at the kitchen table with his laptop open and a glass of water he hadn't touched. He had been thinking about the flagged address all evening. Not the calls themselves. Those were Ivory's doing, and Ivory's pattern was already clear. What bothered him was something quieter and more dangerous. Something systemic. He had spent enough years in law enforcement to know how paper trails worked and what they could be made to say in the wrong hands. 3 incident notations on a single address in one day looked like one thing from the outside. A problem house. A troublesome resident. A place worth watching. It didn't matter that every single call was false. The record didn't explain itself. It just existed. He opened the department's internal portal using his employee credentials. His official start date was still 2 weeks out, but incoming personnel had limited red access for onboarding purposes. He typed in his home address. 3 incident notations, all from today, all originating from the same reporting party. He sat back. Then he ran a broader search. Ivory Parvan's address as the originating caller. 23 calls came back in the system, matching Lenora's journal almost exactly. Date for date, incident for incident. But what the system showed that Lenora's journal couldn't capture was the official outcome column beside each entry. Unfounded. 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 No further action. Unfounded. No further action. 23 times, officers had shown up, found nothing, and left. 23 times, the responding report had closed the matter. And 23 times, the system had simply absorbed it. No review, no pattern flag, no escalation. The calls disappeared into the database like stones dropped into deep water. No ripples, no record of concern about the caller herself. The machine didn't question Ivory. It just responded to her. Manuel leaned forward. He navigated to the complaint submission portal, the one available to civilian residents. He started filling in the form. Date, address, description of incident, names of responding officers. He got halfway through and stopped. He stared at the screen. If he submitted this complaint tonight, from this address, It would become Incident Notation Number 4, a resident complaint filed by the occupant of a newly flagged address on the same day as 3 prior calls. To anyone reviewing the file without context, a supervisor, a council member, a lawyer, it would look like a dispute between neighbors, a new resident already causing friction. He could already hear how it would be framed. He closed the submission portal without filing. He sat in the silence of his new kitchen and looked at the water glass he still hadn't touched. Outside, the street was dark and still. Someone's porch light was on 2 houses down. A dog barked once and went quiet. He thought about the Washingtons, the family from Lenora's journal who had finally given up and moved. He wondered what their breaking point had looked like, whether it had been loud or quiet, whether they'd seen it coming, or whether one ordinary morning they had simply woken up and decided they were too tired to keep fighting for something that should never have required fighting in the first place. He understood that feeling. He also knew he wasn't going to act on it. Manuel closed the laptop. He picked up the water glass and finally drank. He stood up and walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the dark street, at the oak tree in his front yard, at the moving truck that would need to go back tomorrow morning, at the house across the way, where every light was off now. Ivory Parvin was asleep. She had made 4 calls in one day, disrupted a family's moving day, put 3 incident flags on a man's home address before he'd even unpacked a single box, and then she had simply gone to bed. That told him everything about how safe she felt, about how long this had been working for her without consequences, about how badly that needed to change. Gwen's voice came softly from the doorway. She was half awake, hair loose around her shoulders, blanket wrapped around her arms. "Everything okay?" she asked. Manuel turned from the window. "Not yet," he said. The precinct smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. Manuel pushed through the front door at 9 in the morning, dressed plainly. Dark jeans, a gray polo shirt, nothing that announced anything about who he was or what he was about to become. He had made a deliberate choice on the drive over. No rank, no introduction beyond his name. Just a new resident stopping by to familiarize himself with the local department before his start date. A normal thing. An unremarkable thing. The desk officer barely looked up. "Help you?" "Just stopping in," Manuel said pleasantly. "Moving into the district. Wanted to introduce myself to the community liaison if they're available. Sign in. Take a seat." He signed in with his name and sat in one of the plastic chairs along the wall. The lobby was quiet for a Tuesday morning. A woman filling out paperwork at the counter, an older man waiting with his hands folded on his knees, a bulletin board covered in outdated flyers. Manuel watched the room the way he always watched rooms. Quietly, thoroughly. That was when Officer Spencer appeared. He was young, late 20s, maybe 30, with a trim build and careful eyes that moved the way experienced officers' eyes move, cataloging everything without appearing to. He was black, in full uniform, carrying a manila folder toward the filing room. He slowed when he passed Manuel, looked at him, looked again. He stopped. "You Manuel Tucker?" he asked quietly, barely moving his lips. Manuel looked up at him. "I am." Spencer glanced toward the front desk. The desk officer was occupied. He tilted his head almost imperceptibly toward the hallway. "Walk with me a minute." They moved down a side corridor away from the lobby, stopping near a supply closet with a door half open. Spencer kept his voice low and steady, the tone of a man sharing information he has been carrying alone for too long. "Your name came through internal comms last week," Spencer said. "Incoming captain. I know who you are." He paused. "I also know what street you moved onto." Manuel waited. "Sycamore Glen has been a situation for a while now," Spencer said carefully. "Ivory Parvin. You've already met her, I'm guessing." Briefly, Manuel said. Spencer nodded slowly. What you probably don't know is that she doesn't just call 911. He paused again, making sure Manuel was following. She calls Genesis Slater, directly, on his personal cell. Manuel kept his expression neutral. The alderman. He sits on the Public Safety Committee, controls a significant piece of our budget, has for 11 years. Spencer shifted his weight. When Ivory calls Slater, Slater calls the precinct commander. And when the commander gets that call, the response gets prioritized. Fast dispatch. No pushback from responding officers. Officers who showed any reluctance about her calls in the past got reassigned within the month. The supply closet hummed with the sound of the building's ventilation. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang twice and stopped. That's why nothing ever got reviewed, Manuel said. It wasn't a question. He was connecting the last piece of something he had already half-assembled in his mind the night before at his kitchen table. Nothing ever got the chance to be reviewed, Spencer said. The calls come in, officers respond, reports get filed and closed, and the whole thing gets smoothed over before it can become anything official. He looked directly at Manuel. It's not broken, Captain. It's working exactly the way somebody designed it to work. Manuel was quiet for a moment. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Spencer looked at him steadily. Because I've been responding to calls on that street for 2 years. I know every family over there. I know what's been happening to them. He straightened slightly. And because you're about to be my commanding officer, I figured you deserved to walk in knowing what you're walking into. Manuel extended his hand. Spencer shook it firmly. They walked back toward the lobby separately, 30 seconds apart. Manuel signed himself out at the front desk, thanked the desk officer, and pushed back through the front door into the morning heat. He sat in his car and did not start the engine. He thought about Lenora's journal. About 23 calls and 23 non-responses and 23 families treated like suspects in their own neighborhood. He had assumed, last night, that Ivory was simply a bully operating alone, cruel and enabled by indifference. She wasn't operating alone. She had a direct line to the man who controlled the department's money. She had political cover. She had a system that had been quietly, carefully arranged around her. Manuel started the engine. He drove home along Sycamore Glen Drive, slowing as he passed number 41. Ivory Parvan's house, neat and ordinary in the morning light, its white shutters bright against the brick. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he drove on. 2 weeks moved the way important weeks always do, faster than you want them to and slower than you can stand. Manuel spent them unpacking boxes, learning the street, and saying very little about what Spencer had told him. He had dinner with Lenora and her grandson Dexter one evening. He helped the young couple 2 doors down carry a couch up their front steps on a Saturday afternoon. He waved at neighbors. He learned names. He watched Ivory Parvan watch him from across the street and gave her nothing back but ordinary life. A man mowing his lawn, a man washing his car, a man sitting on his porch reading the newspaper on a Sunday morning. He gave her nothing she could use, but he was always watching. Monday morning arrived hard and bright. Manuel was up at 5. He showered, dressed carefully, and stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a moment longer than usual. The uniform was pressed and perfect. The captain's bars catching the light, the badge centered, every detail exactly right. Gwen appeared in the doorway behind him, already dressed for her first week of teacher orientation. She looked at him in the mirror and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she straightened his collar, which didn't need straightening, and kissed him once on the cheek. "Go show them," she said. He drove to the precinct with the windows down. The department's 90-year history hung on the lobby wall in framed photographs, rows of captains going back to 1934. every single face white, every single year accounted for until now. Manuel walked past the wall without stopping. He had a full morning scheduled. Briefings, introductions, a department-wide address at 9 o'clock. The officers assembled in the main briefing room were a mixed picture. Some stood straight, with genuine respect. Some were cautious, measuring. A few wore expressions Manuel had seen before on men who had decided in advance to have a problem with him. He noted all of it and addressed none of it directly. He spoke for 12 minutes, clearly, without notes. He talked about accountability, about community trust, about what it meant to wear a badge on streets where people actually lived their lives. He did not mention Sycamore Glen. He did not need to. When he finished, the room was quiet for a beat, and then applause began, genuine and growing. He was back in his office by 10:15, when his desk phone rang. Dispatch. An incoming call notification flagged for his awareness. Standard procedure for calls involving his residential address, a protocol he had quietly requested during onboarding. "Captain, we just logged a 911 call from Sycamore Glen Drive," the dispatcher said. "Caller reports a suspicious man in uniform knocking on doors in the neighborhood. Responding unit is Flint." Manuel set down his pen. "Thank you," he said. He stood up, put on his hat, and walked out to his car. He had stopped at home first thing that morning, before coming to the precinct, to pick up the welcome basket Gwen had prepared for the Hendersons, the new family that had moved in 3 doors down over the weekend. A small thing, a neighborly thing. He had planned to drop it off on his lunch break. He was standing on the Hendersons' porch, basket in hand, when Flint's squad car rolled up. Flint got out. He saw the uniform first, captain's bars, badge, the full dress. Then he saw the face. Then he stopped walking entirely. Right there on the sidewalk, one hand still on his car door. The color shifted slightly in his face. Across the street, Ivory Parvan's front door opened. She stepped onto her porch with the confidence of a woman who had done this 24 times and expected the same result she always got. Her eyes went to Flint. Then they traveled to the man on the Hendersons' porch. She saw the uniform. She saw the bars. She read the name on the badge. The confidence left her face like air leaving a balloon. Manuel came down the porch steps and walked toward Flint at a measured pace. He stopped in front of him and extended his hand. Flint shook it automatically, still recalibrating. "Officer Flint," Manuel said pleasantly. "I believe this is my call." Flint managed a nod. "Yes, sir." "Captain?" Manuel turned toward Ivory Parvan. She was still standing on her porch, frozen, her phone hanging at her side. He crossed the street and stopped at the foot of her driveway. He looked up at her with an expression that was completely, deliberately calm. "Mrs. Parvan," he said, "I'm Captain Manuel Tucker. I live right there." He nodded toward his house. "I imagine we'll be seeing a lot of each other." Ivory said nothing. Manuel held her gaze for one more moment, then turned and walked back to the Hendersons' porch to deliver the basket. Behind him, before he reached the door, he heard Ivory go back inside. And he knew, without turning around, that she was already dialing Genesis Slater. The Gazette ran the story on Tuesday morning. Manuel found it on the front step when he went out to get the paper, folded neatly, still damp from the sprinklers. The headline read, "Claremont makes history. City's first black police captain takes command." There was a photograph of him from the department's official press session, in full uniform, direct gaze, badge catching the light. He looked exactly like what he was. Gwen read it over breakfast and tapped the photo with one finger. "Frame-worthy," she said. By mid-morning, congratulatory texts had filled his phone. Fellow officers, old academy classmates. His mother called twice. Someone left a small bouquet of sunflowers on the porch. No card, just flowers, left by a neighbor who wanted him to know they were glad he was there. For about 4 hours, it felt uncomplicated. Good, even. Then the afternoon came. Manuel was in his office reviewing shift schedules when Spencer appeared in the doorway and quietly closed the door behind him. "You need to see something," Spencer said. He set a printed sheet on the desk. It was a screenshot of a post from a local political blog called the Claremont Ledger. Widely read, particularly among the older, more conservative neighborhoods on the city's west side. The post had no byline, just a headline and 4 careful paragraphs. Questions about the new captain's priorities. Manuel read it once, then again. The language was surgical. Nothing overtly accusatory, just concerns and questions raised by community members about whether a captain who resided within his own patrol district could remain impartial, whether the appointment had been more about optics than qualifications, whether certain personal grievances on the captain's own street might begin to influence departmental decisions. Not one specific claim, not one name, just enough to plant the seed and step back and let it grow. Manuel set the paper down. "How long has it been up?" "Since this morning," Spencer said. "Regional talk radio picked it up about an hour ago. Host spent 10 minutes on it between traffic and weather." Manuel nodded slowly. He knew exactly what this was. Not a complaint. Not an investigation. Just a narrative. Released early, ahead of anything he might actually do. Designed to frame every future action he took as suspect before he took it. Standard procedure for people who understood that public opinion moved faster than due process. "Slater," Manuel said. Spencer said nothing, which was confirmation enough. 2 days passed. Then the calls started again. Not directed at Manuel. Ivory had learned that lesson. Instead, the calls targeted the street itself with renewed aggression, as if she was compensating for having been momentarily exposed. Thursday afternoon, a call reporting a suspicious vehicle parked in front of Lenora's house. It was Dexter's car. He had owned it for 8 months. Friday morning, a call about loud music disturbing the peace from the direction of the Hendersons' house. The Hendersons had a toddler who went to bed at 7:30. The music was a wind chime on their porch. Friday evening, the call that made Gwen's hands shake. Dexter had finished his shift at the hardware store on 5th Street and was walking home the same route he walked every single day. Down Maple, left on Birch, right onto Sycamore Glen. 17 years old, work shirt still on, name tag still clipped to his pocket. 3 blocks from his grandmother's house. Ivory called and reported a young man behaving suspiciously near parked cars. A squad car intercepted Dexter on the corner of Birch and Sycamore. The officer was apologetic and clearly uncomfortable. Dexter stood on the sidewalk with his work name tag still on his chest and answered every question with quiet, exhausted patience. Gwen saw it from her car, returning from school. She pulled over. She sat and watched until the officer let Dexter go and drove away. Dexter walked the last 3 blocks home without looking up from the pavement. That night, Gwen opened a fresh notebook at Lenora's kitchen table. She dated the top of the first page and began to write. Every detail, every time, every name. Her handwriting was smaller and more controlled than her usual schoolteacher script. She was pressing the pen harder than she needed to. Lenora sat across from her with her own journal open, both women writing in silence under the same kitchen light. After a while, Lenora reached across the table without looking up from her own page and placed her hand over Gwen's. "You keep writing," she said quietly. "Don't you stop." Gwen didn't stop. Greater Harvest Baptist Church smelled like candle wax and old wood, and something that felt, even to people who hadn't grown up in a church, like safety. It was a Sunday evening, just past 7. The main sanctuary lights were dimmed, and the side meeting room was full, folding chairs arranged in uneven rows, maybe 40 people packed into a space designed for 30. Fans hummed in the corners, children sat on laps. Older men in short sleeves fanned themselves with paper programs left over from the morning service. Manuel and Gwen slipped in near the back. Manuel in a plain white shirt and dark slacks. Nothing about him announcing anything. He had made that choice deliberately on the drive over. Tonight he was not the captain. He was a neighbor, a resident, a man whose wife had been shaking when she came home Friday evening and hadn't fully stopped since. Gwen found 2 seats beside a woman she recognized from the end of the block. They exchanged a look that said everything without a word. At the front of the room, standing behind a folding table with a laptop and a neat stack of folders, was Veronica O'Neill. She was 39, with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, like she had forgotten they were there. She wore a dark blazer over a simple blouse and moved with the unhurried confidence of a woman who had stood in front of hostile rooms before and was not afraid of this one. She didn't open with pleasantries. "You all know why we're here," she said. "So let's talk about what we can actually do." She was a civil rights attorney, she explained, in practice for 12 years. The last 4 focused almost entirely on housing discrimination and civil harassment cases. She had been building a case on behalf of 3 Sycamore Glen families for the past several months. Lenora Baker, the Hendersons, a retired couple named the Bryants, who had moved away 8 months ago but were still willing to participate as plaintiffs. Her evidence was substantial. She walked through it plainly, without legal jargon, in language everyone in the room could follow. Documented calls, a pattern that any reasonable person, any reasonable judge, could identify with 5 minutes of attention. The dates, the originating address, the demographic profile of every targeted resident. It was not ambiguous. "What I don't have," Veronica said, setting down her folder, "is the connection between Ivory Parvan and the political infrastructure that's been protecting her. The 911 calls are public record. The calls between Ivory and Alderman Slater's personal cell phone are not." She looked around the room. "And without that connection, we have a harassment case, a winnable one, but not one that changes anything structural, not one that stops this from happening again on the next street." The room was quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when people recognize the truth in something. After the meeting, as the chairs scraped back and people gathered in small clusters, Manuel moved toward the front of the room. Gwen stayed near the back, talking with Lenora. Veronica was packing her folders when Manuel stopped in front of her table. "Mrs. O'Neill," he said, "I have some information that might be relevant to your case." She looked up at him. Something shifted in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or the particular alertness of a lawyer who has just heard a door open. They moved to a quieter corner of the room. Manuel spoke for 30 minutes, keeping his voice low and steady. He told her about Spencer, about the watch commander, about the call chain between Ivory and Slater that had been quietly operating inside the department for years, prioritizing her calls, absorbing her abuse, protecting her from review. He did not give her more than he had. He was careful about that, but he gave her everything he knew. Veronica listened without interrupting. She asked 3 precise questions when he finished. Then she was quiet for a moment. "The missing piece isn't Slater's phone records," she said slowly. "I can't get those without a subpoena, and I can't get a subpoena without more than what I have." She looked at him directly. "The missing piece is inside your department, Captain. The suppression chain. If there's a record of complaints that were filed and then deliberately buried, that's the bridge between Ivory's calls and Slater's interference." Manuel held her gaze. "I'm aware. If you find that chain," Veronica said, "this case becomes unbeatable." She pulled a business card from her blazer pocket and held it out. Manuel took it. They shook hands. Outside in the parking lot, Manuel found Gwen waiting by the car. She looked at him with a question she hadn't asked yet. "We're not done," he told her. She nodded once. "Good," she said. The diner was called Piercettes. It sat on a 2-lane road about a mile and a half off the main strip, the kind of place that had been there long enough to stop trying to look like anything other than what it was. Vinyl booths, laminated menus, coffee that came in a pot, whether you asked for it or not. Manuel had driven past it a dozen times without ever stopping. He wouldn't have found it on his own. Grant Melcher had chosen it specifically. Manuel understood why the moment he walked in and saw how far it was from everything. No precinct officers on their lunch break, no city hall staffers, no one who would recognize either of them and think to mention it later. Melcher was already in a corner booth when Manuel arrived, in civilian clothes, a coffee cup in front of him that he was holding with both hands like it was keeping him warm despite the July heat outside. He looked smaller out of uniform, older. Manuel slid into the booth across from him. "Thanks for coming," Melcher said. "You said it was important." "It is." Melcher turned the coffee cup slowly in his hands. "I've been hearing things. About Slater. About the review he's been laying the groundwork for." He looked up. "You haven't done a single thing wrong, Manuel. I want to say that first." "I know," Manuel said. "Doesn't matter," Melcher said. "That's not how this works, and you know it." He set the cup down. "If you touch the Sycamore Glen matter from inside the department, if you initiate any kind of internal inquiry, redirect any resources, make any official move that can be traced back to a personal stake in the outcome, Slater will use it. He'll call it a conflict of interest. He'll have 2 council members voting for a formal review before the ink is dry." He paused. "He's already primed them." Manuel said nothing. He had known this. Hearing it stated plainly by someone who had operated inside the system for 30 years still landed differently. "So, what are you telling me?" Manuel asked. Melcher reached down to the seat beside him and lifted a thick manila folder onto the table. He set it between them without opening it. It was heavy, maybe 60, 70 pages, held together with a binder clip. "I'm telling you not to touch it from the inside," Melcher said. "And I'm giving you everything I have so someone else can." Manuel looked at the folder, then at Melcher. 2 years, Melcher said. "Complaints filed by Sycamore Glen residents. Formal complaints, Manuel. Signed, dated, submitted through proper channels by real people with real names who did everything right." His jaw tightened slightly. Every single one was flagged by the watch commander as unactionable. Officers were verbally instructed to close them out and move on. Nothing was escalated. Nothing was reviewed. He tapped the folder once with 2 fingers. "I kept personal copies. I don't know exactly why. Maybe I knew this day was coming. Maybe I just couldn't throw them away." "Why didn't you act on them yourself?" Manuel asked. Not accusatory, just a real question. Melcher was quiet for a moment. "Because I was a year from retirement, and I told myself it wasn't my fight." He said it flatly, without self-pity or excuse. Just the plain truth of a man who had already judged himself for it and wasn't asking for absolution. "That was wrong. I know it was wrong." Manuel picked up the folder. He opened it and read the first page. "A complaint filed by Lenora Baker, dated 22 months ago, with a detailed account of 3 consecutive calls Ivory had made targeting Dexter. At the bottom, in red pen, a single notation in handwriting Manuel didn't recognize. Reviewed. No further action required. W.C. Watch Commander." He turned 3 more pages. Same notation, different dates, different families, same red pen, like a stamp. like the complaints had been processed through a machine specifically designed to make them disappear. "The watch commander," Manuel said. "Reports to a deputy who reports to Slater's contact on the force," Melcher said. "Has for 6 years." Manuel closed the folder. He sat with it for a moment, the weight of it in his hands, the weight of what it represented. Families who had done everything they were supposed to do, who had used the system the way the system told them to use it, who had been quietly erased for their trouble. He stood, tucked the folder under his arm, and left 2 20s on the table for the coffee neither of them had really touched. "Thank you, Grant," he said. Melcher nodded and looked back at his cup. Manuel walked out of Pierce Set's into the bright morning and drove directly to Veronica O'Nell's office. She was with a client, her assistant said. He said he would wait. 17 minutes later, Veronica appeared in the hallway, took one look at the folder under his arm, and waved him straight through. He set it on her desk, and she opened it and read the first page. She exhaled slowly. "This," she said quietly, "is the suppression chain." The post went up on a Wednesday morning. Manuel didn't see it himself. Spencer found it first, printed it, and had it on Manuel's desk before 8:30, the same way he had brought the first one. Quietly, door closed, no extra words around it. The blog was called The Claremont Ledger. Manuel had looked it up after the first post. It had no listed editor, no physical address, no verifiable ownership, just a name and a website and a readership of several thousand people who lived in the older, whiter neighborhoods on the city's west side, and trusted it the way people trust things that confirm what they already believe. The headline this time was sharper. "Is Captain Tucker using his badge to settle personal scores?" Manuel read it standing up. He didn't sit down. He read it the way you read something you need to understand completely before you react to it. Slowly, twice, absorbing not just the words, but the architecture behind them. The post was 4 paragraphs. No names beyond his own. No specific accusations, just a careful arrangement of concerns and questions from unnamed community members who were troubled by reports that the new captain had allegedly been directing attention toward a longtime resident on his own street. The language was hedged at every turn. Allegedly. Reportedly. Sources suggest. It was written by someone who understood exactly how close to a line they could get without crossing it. But the message was clear. He is corrupt. He is retaliating. He cannot be trusted. Manuel set the paper down on his desk. By 10 o'clock, a regional talk radio host named Boy Garrett had picked up the story. Manuel knew the show. It ran from 9 to noon on AM 1340. Background noise in diners and barbershops and car repair waiting rooms across the county. Garrett spent 11 minutes on it between traffic updates and a commercial for a local mattress store. He didn't allege anything directly either. He just asked questions, concerned questions, questions any reasonable citizen might ask. By noon, the comments section on the Claremont Ledger post had 64 replies. Manuel did not read them. The damage inside the precinct was quieter but more specific. Senior Officer Pierce Gallo, 14 years on the force, submitted a transfer request to a neighboring district on Thursday morning. He gave no stated reason beyond seeking new professional opportunities. By Friday afternoon, Sergeant Julia Corey had submitted a second request, citing departmental uncertainty. 2 requests in 4 days. Slater would point to them as evidence of a department in crisis. Manuel knew it. The requests themselves were probably coordinated. Not directly, perhaps, but nudged. A word in the right ear. A suggestion that things were going to get uncomfortable and that comfortable people should find somewhere else to be. The atmosphere in the briefing room shifted. Not dramatically. Nothing Manuel could point to directly. just a new carefulness in how some officers held themselves around him, a slight delay before people laughed at something he said. The particular silence that follows a man when people are waiting to see whether he is going to survive. Manuel ran his briefings the same way he always ran them. Clear, direct, without visible strain. Friday evening, Gwen came home from school and went straight through the house to the back porch without stopping to change her clothes or set down her bag. Manuel found her there 20 minutes later, sitting in the dark with her school bag still on her shoulder, not crying, but close to it. The particular stillness of someone holding themselves together through sheer force of will. He sat beside her without saying anything. After a while, she said, "One of my students asked me today if it was true that her dad was going to get fired." She paused. "Her dad is Officer Spencer." Manuel closed his eyes briefly. "We did everything right," Gwen said. Her voice was low and careful. "We saved for 15 years. We bought a house in a good neighborhood. You built a whole career. We did every single thing you're supposed to do." She stopped. "And it's still not enough. It's never enough." She wasn't asking him to fix it. She was just saying the true thing out loud, because it needed to be said somewhere that was safe. Manuel put his arm around her. They sat there for a long time as the neighborhood went dark around them. The street quiet outside, the oak tree in the front yard just a shape against the sky. Across the street, Ivory Parvan's porch light was on. It was always on. Gwen straightened eventually. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She reached down, unzipped her bag, and took out her notebook, the one she had started at Lenora's kitchen table. She opened it to the next blank page. She picked up her pen, and she kept writing. The injunction was granted on a Thursday afternoon. Veronica called Manuel at 3:17. He was in the middle of a budget review meeting and stepped out into the hallway to take it. She didn't waste time on preamble. "Judge Calloway signed it," she said. "Formal audit of every 911 call originating from Ivory Parvan's address. Pattern analysis, response prioritization, the whole thing. It's official." Manuel leaned against the hallway wall and let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for weeks. "How long before it starts?" he asked. "Audit team has 30 days to compile, but the order is public record as of today." She paused. "She's going to know by tonight." He thanked her and went back into the meeting. He sat down, picked up his pen, and looked at the budget spreadsheet in front of him without seeing a single number on the page. The news moved through Sycamore Glen, the way good news always moves through a neighborhood that has been waiting a long time for it. Fast and electric, door to door, phone call to phone call. Lenora called Gwen at 4 o'clock. Gwen was still at school and had to step into the hallway to take the call, pressing the phone to her ear with both hands. When she came back into her classroom, one of her students asked if she was okay. "Better than okay," Gwen told her. That evening felt different from any evening since moving day. Manuel and Gwen sat on their front porch as the sun went down, and for the first time since July, the porch felt like what it was supposed to feel like, their own. Gwen had her feet tucked under her on the chair and a glass of sweet tea in her hand. Manuel had his arm resting on the railing. Down the street, they could hear Lenora laughing at something Dexter said in the front yard. It felt, briefly, like breathing. Ivory Parvan's house was dark and silent across the street. 72 hours later, Genesis Slater made his move. Manuel heard about it from Spencer on a Sunday morning, a phone call that came in at 7:45 while Manuel was making coffee. Slater had called an emergency session of the Public Safety Committee for Monday morning. He was formally requesting a council review of Captain Tucker's leadership based on the 2 officer transfer requests, Gallo and Corey, which he was packaging as evidence of a department in crisis under new, inexperienced command. Manuel set down the coffee pot carefully. He moved fast, he said. He had it ready, Spencer said. This wasn't a reaction to the injunction. He built this in advance and waited for the right moment to drop it. The counsel review request landed on the same day Ivory's attorney, Harvey Cross, filed a countermotion in civil court. The motion argued that the 911 audit constituted a violation of Ivory Parvan's privacy rights and a chilling effect on law-abiding citizens' ability to report crime. It also named Captain Manuel Tucker personally as a party of interest, arguing he had used his position and personal relationships to engineer a legal campaign against his own neighbor. 2 fronts, same day, coordinated. The injunction was stayed pending the appeal. Manuel was still processing both filings that afternoon when Lenora called. Her voice was different, quieter than usual, stripped of its usual steadiness. "My journal is gone," she said. Manuel straightened immediately. "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean it's not here." Her voice was careful and controlled in the way that people get controlled when they are very close to falling apart. "I keep it in the kitchen drawer. Same place I've kept it for 7 years. I went to write in it this morning and it wasn't there. Were there any signs of a break-in?" "Nothing. No broken windows. No forced doors," she paused. "But my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, she mentioned 2 days ago that she saw a man on the street she didn't recognize, taking photographs. She thought he was from the city, maybe, checking utilities or something. I didn't think anything of it at the time." Manuel thought about Harvey Cross's countermotion, about the timing, about the kind of private investigator a high-end attorney retained when he needed something to disappear quietly. "Lenora," he said, "don't touch the drawer. Don't move anything." "Manuel." Her voice cracked slightly, just once. 7 years, every name, every date, every single one of those families. She stopped. "It's just gone." Manuel closed his eyes for one moment. Then he opened them. "I'm coming over," he said. He grabbed his keys and drove the 4 houses down and parked in Lenora's driveway. She met him at the door, smaller somehow than she had seemed before, and walked him to the kitchen without a word. The drawer was open, empty. Lenora sat down heavily in her kitchen chair and stared at it. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the wall ticked. The room was completely silent. The precinct was empty at 11 o'clock at night. Not completely. There was always a skeleton crew, always someone at dispatch, always a patrol car or 2 rolling through the dark city streets outside. But the administrative wing was quiet. The hallways were dim. The cleaning crew had come and gone, leaving the faint smell of floor polish and disinfectant behind them. Manuel sat at his desk, with the overhead light off and only the desk lamp on, a small yellow circle in the dark. In front of him were 3 folders: Melcher's buried complaint file, the printed copy of Flint's suppressed reports that he hadn't received yet but was already expecting, and Veronica's case summary. He had read all of them so many times the pages were starting to feel soft at the edges. The counsel review was scheduled. The injunction was stayed. Lenora's journal was gone. 2 officers had transferred out. The regional press was carrying a narrative about a captain in over his head, settling personal vendettas, destabilizing a department that had functioned just fine before he arrived. He had every reason to retreat. He knew that. He had sat with that knowledge all evening, let it take up space, examined it honestly. Retreat was not cowardice. It was math. His career against a neighborhood dispute that the system had already decided it didn't want to resolve. Gwen's peace of mind. Their 15 years of savings in a house that had become a battleground before they'd finished unpacking. He picked up his phone and called Grant Melcher. Melcher answered on the 2nd ring, groggy but awake. When Manuel identified himself, Melcher was quiet for a moment, then said, "You're calling late." "I know," Manuel said. I wanted to tell you I heard what you said, about not touching it from the inside. He paused. I'm not going to. A silence on the line. Then Melcher said, Good. Manuel hung up and immediately dialed Veronica. She answered on the fourth ring, clearly working late herself, the sound of papers shuffling in the background. He gave her the update. Both filings, the stayed injunction, the council review. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment in the way that lawyers get quiet when they are rapidly recalculating. The journal, she said. That's the real damage. Everything else we can fight. But Lenora's documentation was the foundation of the pattern evidence. Another pause. Tell me she had copies somewhere. I don't know, Manuel said honestly. I'm going to call her right now. He switched lines and called Lenora. It was late, past 11, but her light had been on when he drove past her house on his way to the precinct. She answered quickly, like she had been sitting with the phone in her hand. I need to ask you something, Manuel said, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Did you ever make copies of the journal? Photographs? Scans? Anything? A long pause, long enough that Manuel felt his stomach tighten. Then Lenora said slowly, My granddaughter, about 2 years ago. The basement flooded, and the journal got water on the cover. It was fine, but it scared her. She made me take photographs of every single page and email them to myself. Another pause. She made me do it right then, that same evening. Wouldn't leave until I did. Manuel sat forward so quickly his chair rolled. Lenora, are those emails still in your inbox? I never delete anything, she said. My granddaughter says I'm going to run out of space one day. I tell her I'll worry about that when it happens. Every page? Manuel asked. All 7 years? Every page, Lenora said. Dated. In order. Manuel put Veronica on a three-way call. He said simply, Lenora, tell her what you just told me. Lenora told her. Veronica was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Lenora, she said, and her voice had shifted into something warm and almost disbelieving. Those emails are digitally time-stamped by Gmail's servers. That timestamp is independently verifiable. It cannot be altered retroactively. A short breath. What they took was a notebook. What you have is a legally admissible digital archive that their private investigator cannot touch because it doesn't exist in any drawer. The line was quiet for a moment. Then Lenora laughed. It started small and grew into something full and genuine and completely unstoppable. The laugh of a 70-year-old woman who had been keeping meticulous records for 7 years and had just discovered that the people who tried to erase her had underestimated her granddaughter. Manuel leaned back in his chair and let himself smile in the dark, empty office. Forward every email to Veronica tonight, he said. Every single one. Already opening my inbox, Lenora said. The front desk officer almost didn't recognize him. Drake Flint had been on the force for 6 years and had spent every one of those years in uniform. Pressed shirt, badge centered, hat level, the whole presentation that turned a person into a symbol of something larger than themselves. Out of uniform, he was just a lean white guy in jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, early 30s, with tired eyes, and a jaw that had been clenched for longer than he probably realized. He asked the desk officer if Captain Tucker was in. It was Tuesday morning, Flint's day off. The desk officer noted that, glanced at the civilian clothes, and picked up the phone without asking questions. Manuel came to the lobby himself. He looked at Flint for a moment, the civilian clothes, the careful expression, the folded papers in his right hand, and said simply, "Come on back." They sat across from each other in Manuel's office with the door closed. The morning light came through the blinds in flat strips across the desk. Flint sat with his forearms on his knees, leaning slightly forward, like a man who had been rehearsing something and wasn't sure the rehearsed version was going to come out right. He set the folded papers on the desk. 3 years ago, he said, I responded to 2 calls on Sycamore Glen Drive that I flagged internally. Not in the official report, I knew better than to put it there, but in the supplemental notes field that goes to the watch commander for review. He nodded toward the papers. I wrote that the calls showed signs of targeting based on the demographic profile of the individuals reported, that the complaints lacked any observable basis, that I believed a pattern review was warranted. Manuel unfolded the papers slowly. 2 printed documents, internal supplemental reports, dated 14 months apart, with Flint's badge number at the top of each one. What happened to them? Manuel asked, though he already knew. Watch commander called me in 2 days after the first one, Flint said. Told me the notes were speculative and inflammatory, and that I needed to be more careful about putting things in writing that could be, his word, misconstrued. He paused. After the second one, I got reassigned to night patrol for 3 months. No explanation given officially. I understood what it meant. Manuel set the papers down flat on the desk and smoothed them with one hand. Why didn't you escalate past the watch commander? He asked. Again, not accusatory, just a real question that needed a real answer. Flint looked at him steadily. Because I'm 34 years old with a mortgage and a daughter starting kindergarten in September, and I looked at what happened to the officers who pushed back before me, and I made a calculation. He said it without flinching from it. It was the wrong calculation. I know that. I'm not asking you to tell me otherwise. Manuel didn't. The room was quiet for a moment. What changed? Manuel asked. Flint was quiet for a beat. Then he said, I was there that first day. Moving day. I was the one who responded to her call and walked up to a man unloading boxes in his own driveway and asked him to prove he lived there. He stopped. I've responded to 11 of her calls over 3 years. 11 times I showed up and found nothing wrong and wrote it up and drove away. His jaw tightened. And now there's a council review happening against a captain who hasn't done a single thing wrong, built out of transfers that were quietly encouraged by people protecting a system I helped maintain by staying quiet. He looked directly at Manuel. That's my line. Right there. Manuel held his gaze for a long moment. Then he said, You understand that coming forward costs you something real. You're not protected by seniority. Slater's people are still in this building. I know, Flint said. I thought about that. He glanced down at the papers on the desk. I thought about Dexter, too. 17 years old. Work shirt on. Name tag. 3 stops in 1 week. He shook his head once. I can't keep making the same calculation. Manuel stood and extended his hand across the desk. Flint stood and shook it. His grip was firm, and his eyes were clear, and he looked, for the first time since he'd walked in, like a man who had set something heavy down. After Flint left, Manuel stood at his desk for a moment, with his hand resting on the 2 printed reports. Then he picked up his phone and called Veronica O'Neill. She answered on the second ring. We have everything, he said. A pause on the line. Then Veronica said, Tell me. Demi Wills had been quiet for 6 weeks. Manuel knew her name. She was the investigative reporter for the Claremont Gazette. Mid-40s, short brown hair, the kind of journalist who asked one careful question and then waited in silence long enough to make people fill the space with things they hadn't planned to say. She had called his office twice since his appointment. He had returned both calls, answered her questions professionally, and given her nothing beyond what was already public record. He hadn't known about the record's request. He found out the same way everyone else did, at 6:47 on a Thursday morning, when his phone buzzed with a news alert from the Gazette's website. The headline filled his screen. Emails show Alderman Slater directed police response on Sycamore Glen for 18 months. Manuel sat on the edge of the bed and read the article in the early morning quiet, while Gwen slept beside him. He read it once fast, then again slowly. Demi Wills had filed a public records request 6 weeks ago. The same week Veronica had filed for the injunction, targeting correspondence between Alderman Slater's official city email account and the precinct's command staff. The request had moved slowly through the city clerk's office, as these things always did, and then the emails had arrived, and Demi Wills had spent 3 weeks verifying every thread before she printed a single word. The emails were damning in the particular way that careful, arrogant people always leave themselves exposed, not through outright statements, but through the steady accumulation of small, revealing instructions. Slater referred to Sycamore Glen complaint management as maintenance. He instructed the watch commander to keep Ivory Parvan's calls a low-friction process. He asked, in one message dated 11 months ago, whether the usual families had generated any formal complaints recently, and whether they had been handled appropriately. No racial language. Slater was too careful for that. But the pattern was unmistakable, and Demi Wills had laid it alongside the documented call history and Flint's suppressed reports, which Veronica had shared with the paper through proper legal channels the previous afternoon. And the picture it painted required no interpretation. Manuel set his phone down on the nightstand. Gwen stirred beside him. "What time is it?" "Almost 7, he said. "Go back to sleep." She opened one eye. She looked at his face. She sat up. "What happened?" He handed her his phone. By 9 o'clock, the article had been shared 1,400 times on social media. By 10, a local television news crew was parked outside Alderman Slater's office on City Hall Drive. His communications director issued a statement at 10:45, calling the emails mischaracterized and taken out of context, and promising a full response at an appropriate time. The appropriate time did not come. By noon, Councilwoman Ruby Lim, who had been one of the 2 votes supporting Slater's leadership review request, had released a statement of her own saying she was reviewing her position in light of new information. The second supporting vote, Councilman Robert Thomas, had stopped returning Slater's calls entirely, according to Spencer, who had heard it from someone in the building. The council meeting was still scheduled for 7 o'clock that evening. Nobody canceled it. Nobody rescheduled it. If anything, by mid-afternoon, it had become the only thing anyone in Claremont wanted to talk about. Greater Harvest Baptist Church mobilized the way it had always mobilized when the neighborhood needed it, quietly, efficiently, and completely. By 3 o'clock, Reverend Daniels had sent a message through the church's phone tree. By 4, rides had been arranged for 12 elderly residents who couldn't drive at night. By 5, the community had claimed the first 4 rows of the council chamber's public gallery. Manuel drove to the church at 5:30 to pick up Lenora. She was ready at the door in a navy blue dress, with her reading glasses in her hand and her phone, with 7 years of photographic documentation in her Gmail inbox, in her purse. Dexter stood behind her in a button-down shirt, his jaw set, looking older than 17. Veronica was already at the council building with her full evidentiary package. She had called Manuel at 4 to confirm that Flint had given a formal recorded statement that afternoon and that the statement had been filed with the court. They arrived at the chamber at 6 o'clock. The room was already full. Manuel held the door for Lenora. She walked in with her chin level and her reading glasses in her hand, and the people in the gallery who recognized her started to stand, one by one, until the whole room was on its feet. Lenora looked straight ahead. At the front of the chamber, Genesis Slater was already seated at the council table. He looked up when they walked in. His expression did not recover. Genesis Slater opened the meeting at 7 o'clock exactly. He had the practiced composure of a man who had been running rooms for 20 years. The measured voice, the careful posture, the reading glasses set just so on the bridge of his nose. He called the session to order, acknowledged the full gallery without looking directly at it, and began his presentation with the unhurried confidence of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. He was wrong about that. "The matter before this council," Slater said, shuffling his papers, "concerns the leadership climate of the Claremont Police Department under its newly appointed captain. We have documented evidence of a morale crisis. 2 senior officers requesting departmental transfers within weeks of the new command structure taking effect." He paused for effect. "This council has a responsibility to the citizens of Claremont," he continued. "A responsibility to ensure that our police department is stable, functional, and free from personal conflicts of interest." Harvey Cross sat in the front row of the gallery with a leather portfolio on his knee and his ankles crossed. Ivory Parvin sat beside him in a dark blazer, her hands folded in her lap, her expression arranged into something that was trying to look like dignified concern and not quite making it. The council chair, a sturdy woman named Alderman Frances Obie, looked at Slater over her own reading glasses. "The council acknowledges the request for review. We'll hear the presentation and then open the floor for public comment before any vote is taken." She looked at the gallery. "We have a full room tonight, so I'll remind everyone that public comment is 3 minutes per speaker, and we conduct ourselves with respect." Slater finished his presentation in 8 minutes. Transfer requests, anonymous morale concerns, the blog posts, which he referenced without naming the ledger. Careful, even now. He built a picture of a department in early crisis, a captain too personally entangled in neighborhood disputes to lead objectively. He sat down and folded his hands and waited. Alderman Obie opened the floor for public comment. Lenora Baker was the first name on the sign-up sheet. She walked to the microphone at the front of the chamber slowly, with her reading glasses on now, her phone in one hand. The room was completely still. She adjusted the microphone, looked down at her screen, and began to read. August 14th. Her voice was clear and unhurried. The Washington family at number 12 Sycamore Glen Drive hosted a birthday cookout. Ivory Parvin called 911 and reported a threatening gathering. 2 officers responded. The Washingtons were eating birthday cake. She turned to the next photograph on her screen. October 3rd. 16-year-old Jenny Merrill was riding his bicycle down Sycamore Glen at dusk. Ivory Parvin called 911 and reported a suspicious individual casing the neighborhood. 1 officer responded. Jenny was delivering church flyers. She kept reading. Entry after entry. Date after date. Family after family. The chamber absorbed every word in absolute silence. No shuffling. No whispering. Nothing. Just Lenora's steady voice filling the room with 7 years of documented truth. She read for exactly 3 minutes. Then she took her glasses off, looked directly at the council table, and sat down. Nobody applauded. The room was too quiet for applause. It was the kind of silence that means something has landed and people are still feeling the weight of where it hit. Gwen spoke next. She talked about moving day, about watching her husband produce his house deed on his own front lawn, about Dexter being stopped 3 times in 1 week, with his work name tag still on his chest. She talked about sitting at Lenora's kitchen table writing things down, because writing things down was the only tool they had been given, and they were going to use every inch of it. Her voice didn't shake. Not once. Dexter spoke after her. 3 minutes, no notes, looking directly at the council table the entire time. Then 3 more neighbors. Then 2 more after that. Each account specific. Each one documented. Each one a real person describing something that had happened to them on a real street in this city. In front of this council. Under this government. Veronica O'Neill approached the microphone last. She didn't use all 3 minutes. She didn't need to. She presented the legal framework in plain language. The digital archive, Flint's formal statement, Melcher's buried complaint folder, and the email chain published that morning in the Gazette. She described the suppression chain from Ivory's calls through Slater's instructions to the watch commander to the deliberate burial of 20-plus formal complaints from residents who had done everything right. Harvey Cross rose from the gallery. Point of procedure. "Sit down, Mr. Cross," Alderman Obie said, without looking at him. He sat down. Veronica concluded, stepped back from the microphone, and returned to her seat. The council voted at 8:43, 6-2 against proceeding with the leadership review. The 2 votes in favor were Slater and one aging ally, whose district had been gerrymandered into irrelevance 3 years ago. Every other council member voted no, including Ruby Lim, who had been one of Slater's original supporters and who did not look at him when she cast her vote. Slater sat perfectly still at the council table. His colleagues were gathering their papers, speaking quietly to staff, doing the small administrative things people do when they want to be seen as busy. Nobody leaned over to say anything to him. Nobody made eye contact. The particular loneliness of a powerful man in the moment his power leaves him. Manuel had seen it before. It never looked any different. Veronica stood and buttoned her blazer. "We'll be refiling the injunction tomorrow morning with the full evidentiary package," she said clearly, to no one and everyone. "The audit will proceed." Ivory Parvin rose from her front row seat and walked toward the chamber exit. The room watched her. Not loudly, no jeering, no confrontation, just eyes. Just 40 people who knew exactly what she had done, watching her walk out of a room where it had finally, publicly, irrevocably caught up with her. She reached the door. She did not look back. The consequences came in sequence, not all at once. That was never how these things worked. Justice didn't arrive in a single dramatic wave. It came methodically, one piece at a time, each piece visible and documented and real. Manuel watched it happen over the following weeks with the particular satisfaction of a man who had learned a long time ago that patience was not the same thing as weakness. Harvey Cross negotiated Ivory Parvin's plea arrangement on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the council meeting. 11 counts of filing false police reports, the ones where dispatch records, officer body camera timestamps, and Lenora's digital archive conclusively proved no legitimate basis existed for the call. Cross had pushed for a deferred adjudication that would keep her record clean. The prosecutor, who had read Demi Wills's article and every line of Veronica's evidentiary package, declined that offer without significant deliberation. Ivory paid $14,000 in fines. She completed a mandatory civil rights education program, 40 hours in person, with documented attendance requirements, and she was placed under a court-monitored injunction for 2 years, prohibiting her from contacting emergency services without documented verifiable cause. Any violation would constitute contempt. The injunction was public record. Manuel read the final plea agreement in his office on a Wednesday afternoon. He read it once, set it down, and went back to work. Genesis Slater resigned from the Public Safety Committee on a Friday, releasing a brief statement through his communications director that cited a desire to focus on his remaining council responsibilities. He announced 3 days later that he would not seek re-election when his term ended in 14 months. The district attorney's office opened a preliminary inquiry into the email chain the following Monday. Whether it would develop into formal charges was a question the legal process would answer in its own time. Manuel had learned not to need certainty about outcomes he couldn't control. What he could see was that Slater no longer called the precinct. The watch commander, who had buried 2 years of complaints, quietly requested early retirement and submitted his paperwork the same week the DA inquiry was announced. The particular machinery that had run Sycamore Glen as a maintenance project for 18 months had simply stopped running. Not with a crash, with a silence. Officer Drake Flint's suppressed reports were formally entered into the departmental record on a Thursday morning. Manuel signed the documentation himself. That afternoon, he submitted a commendation recommendation for Flint, not for heroism, not for anything dramatic, but for integrity exercised under professional pressure at personal cost. The commendation was approved by the end of the week. Flint stopped by Manuel's office the afternoon it was approved. He stood in the doorway and said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Manuel said. Flint nodded. He started to leave, then turned back. "Captain, for what it's worth, I'm glad you moved on to Sycamore Glen." Manuel looked at him for a moment. "So am I," he said. The proposal for Claremont's first Civilian Community Oversight Board went before the full City Council on a Thursday evening in late August. Manuel had drafted the framework himself over 3 evenings at the kitchen table, Gwen reading each section and marking her teacher's corrections in the margins. The board would have real authority, review power over complaint handling, pattern analysis, response prioritization. Not advisory. Actual oversight. It passed 7-1. Lenora Baker was appointed as its first member the following week. She showed up to the first organizational meeting in the same navy blue dress she had worn to the council chamber, her reading glasses in her hand, her phone in her purse. She came prepared. She always came prepared. The block party happened on a Saturday evening in late August, the way good things on good streets happen, without formal organization, without anyone being officially in charge. Someone rolled out a grill. Someone else appeared with folding tables. A portable speaker materialized on the Hendersons' porch, playing Motown loud enough to reach the end of the block. Children chased fireflies in the darkening yard. Dexter stood with a group of friends near the grill, laughing at something, taller somehow than he had seemed in July. Lenora sat in a lawn chair in her front yard, a plate of food in her lap, watching the street with the satisfied expression of someone who had been waiting a long time for an evening exactly like this one. Manuel and Gwen sat on their front porch. Gwen had her feet tucked under her on the chair, her sweet tea in her hand, her school bag just inside the front door where she had dropped it on her way through. She was watching the street with something open in her face that had been closed for most of the summer. Manuel looked down at the block, at his neighbors, at the music, at the fireflies, and then his eyes traveled naturally to the house across the street. Ivory Parvan's house was dark, every light off, curtains drawn, and planted in the front lawn, tilted slightly from where the ground was still soft from a recent rain, a for sale sign. He looked at it for a moment, just a moment. Then he turned back to his street, his neighbors, his home. The grill was smoking. Dexter was laughing. Lenora was eating her food with great satisfaction. Gwen rested her head on his shoulder. "I'm glad we didn't leave," she said. Manuel put his arm around her. The music drifted up from the Hendersons' porch, something warm and familiar from a long time ago, the kind of song that knew exactly what it was doing. He smiled. "So am I," he said. He didn't look at the for sale sign again. He didn't need to. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.